Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, Continuous Improvement in Education, a Toolkit for Schools and Districts, hosted by the Regional Educational Lab for the Northeastern Islands. Thank you all for joining us. I'm Diana Wogan, a researcher from the REL Northeastern Islands and one of the authors of the Toolkit. Here's our agenda for today. We'll start with welcome and introductions, take a look at continuous improvement in action and discuss what continuous improvement is, provide an overview of the toolkit, touch on when and where to use continuous improvement, assess your readiness to engage in continuous improvement, and finally hear from a practitioner who actually piloted the toolkit before taking some questions from all of you and wrapping up. We are your presenters for today. Again, I'm Diana Wogan, and I'm joined by my RELNE colleagues, Shayla Rodriguez and Karen Shackman, and Cassandra Townsend is providing a practitioner's perspective today. Cassandra is Director of Special Education at Charlotte Central School and Champlain Valley School District in Vermont. So if you're not familiar with REL Northeastern Islands, we're one of 10 RELs across the country funded by the U.S. Department of Education to work with educators and policymakers to use research and evidence to improve outcomes for students. That means we conduct applied research, we share research findings with the region, and we provide technical assistance to help practitioners use data and research. And the Northeastern Islands region includes New York, New England, Puerto Rico, and the U.S. Virgin Islands. So we have a few goals for today's webinar. We hope you learn about the toolkit and how it might apply to your work, learn about assessing your school or district's readiness to engage in continuous improvement, and explore some of the tools and resources in the toolkit. So let's hear from all of you. Can you share in the chat box that just opened up, what one question you have about continuous improvement? You might have a lot of questions, but would love to hear one question you have that you came with today. Looks like a bunch of people are typing. Thanks for sharing. And although we won't have time to answer these questions right now, it will give us a sense of the kind of information you're looking for, and we'll have a question and answer session later on in the webinar. Great. So we have some questions about data quality. It's a great question. Data is really important in continuous improvement. Some questions around identifying appropriate measures and tracking progress, especially related to COVID, a really relevant question. Question about grants related to continuous improvement. And just a reminder that you all are on mute, so the only way to ask questions here is through the chat. But again, we're keeping these all, and we'll get to as many as we can, either through the chat or at the end during our question and answer session. This is great. Someone asking about specific strategies for building capacity to spread and scale continuous improvement. That's great. Wisconsin has a strong continuous improvement process, and they're looking for ideas on how to strengthen it. It's great to hear. Someone's asking about how this compares to the work by Carnegie and improvement science. Yeah, and I think, some of these questions you'll find will be answered through the webinar. Some of the questions we don't cover in the webinar, but will be covered through the toolkit. And some of these we can get to in the question and answer session a little later on. So thank you so much for entering these. This is great to see. And keep entering questions in the chat box over here. And as I said, we'll keep track of these. And Karen is going to be answering questions as well as we go. So let me hand it off to my colleague Shayla, who is going to talk about continuous improvement.
Thank you, Diana. Good afternoon, everyone. So now we are going to dive right in and first talk about continuous improvement and what it means. So I'm going to take the next few minutes to give you a brief overview. So a central element of continuous improvement is the model for improvement. And so the model for improvement always refers to 3 essential questions that guide the continuous improvement process. The first question is, what problem are we trying to solve? And so for a school or a district or an organization to improve, the key participants must set clear and specific goals that are derived from a clear articulation of a problem or issue that really requires attention or needs to be addressed. So in defining the problem, they identify an objective, referred to as an aim statement, and we'll talk a little bit about aim statements later, that they intend to accomplish through the continuous improvement effort. And the second question in the model for improvement is, what change might we introduce and why? And this is the heart of the continuous improvement process, which requires educators or an improvement team to develop, test, and implement change practices. So some examples of change practices could be testing out a new co-teaching planning protocol, or providing, student choice when they are completing assignments. So selecting, testing, and implementing these change practices are at the core of continuous improvement. And lastly, the last question is, how will we know that a change is actually an improvement? So an essential part of this process is examining whether the change practice has in fact addressed the problem and made some meaningful improvement. So you need to have clear and specific measures to capture both the processes, and the outcomes are therefore at the heart of this continuous improvement process. So now, after answering the questions for the model for improvement, the processes that we engage in define the effort as well. So the continuous improvement process, it really does engage educators or a team of educators to really focus on a specific problem of practice. And through a series of iterative cycles, they first identify and test some change practices. They make predictions about what may happen. They gather some data about those change practices, and then they study the potential influence of those change practices on outcomes of interest. So this could be such things such as, student attendance or math performance. So these cycles, which are called Plan, Do, Study, Act cycles, and I'm sure many of you have heard of the Plan, Do, Study, Act cycles, it requires 4 steps or stages. So once the problem has been identified in the plan stage, which is the first stage, a change practice is determined by the team that they want to test out. And in the do stage, they actually implement that change practice and gather some data. In the third stage, which is the study stage, they basically analyze the data, determine how to act on it, which leads to the last stage of the cycle, the act stage, in which the participants or team members make a decision on what to do next. So if the change practice made a difference, they can adopt that change practice or decide to scale it up. Or maybe the data shows that there needs to be some tweaks made, and if so, they can make those tweaks and test it again. Or if the change practice did not work, well, they can abandon it and try out another change practice. So I'm going to give you an example of what that looks like in our lives. So, and that, we sometimes, don't realize that we actually utilize this process in our personal lives. A lot of times, we're doing things, but, you don't realize that you're actually doing continuous improvement. So let me give you an example. Let's say that you want to lose 5 pounds, and you want to determine what it is that you need to change in order to lose those 5 pounds. So for today, let's just say that you're going to increase the number of jogs you complete per week from 2 jogs to 4 jogs per week. You try that for a few weeks to see if the increase in exercise is actually helping you lose weight. If it is, then you continue that practice. And if it isn't in helping and decreasing your weight, then you may want to try something else or add to that practice, such as eating less or cutting down on your daily calorie intake. And you try that again to see if there's any change in your weight. So now I want to hear from you. Can you provide an example of continuous improvement in your life and type it in the chat box? You can add, small examples of, what you've done in your personal lives that may relate to continuous improvement. I'm always curious to hear folks give examples. Training my dogs, yes, because you have to repeat the different strategies and change the strategies with your dogs. That is totally, definitely related to continuous improvement because I've done it with my own dog. That's a good one. We have your exercise, route to work. Find a faster route to work and exercise routine. Those are big ones. You always want to try to find, right, the fastest route when you go to work. Getting children to do chores. All right, attempting to make the perfect Alfredo sauce from scratch. Thank you, yes. So you just keep trying, right? You tweak the Alfredo sauce until you get it right. And I'm huge on cooking, so I'm always constantly trying out new recipes and tweaking them. And so that is definitely part of continuous improvement. Getting 10,000 steps a day, yes. Making bread pudding. I like that. Reducing the amount of plastic in my grocery basket, yes. That is definitely an example of that. And getting enough sleep. So these are all great. I mean, we're constantly working to improve, right, our lives every day. And, we don't realize that we're actually gathering data. We're actually making adjustments all the time. So what continuous improvement does, it really does systematizes and makes more formal the process of testing and making changes. So this was really great. Thank you for sharing. So now we'd like to introduce to you what continuous improvement looks like in action. So what we're going to do is we're going to, in a minute or so, we're going to be showing you a short video. To do that, we're going to show you a short video about a project that actually the REL NIE supported in Maine several years ago. So please make sure if you joined over the phone, please unmute your computer speakers so that you can actually hear the video.
Oftentimes, teachers engaged in practice in schools and districts don't have the time to stop and systematically look at problems. The continuous improvement process provides a particular process that they can engage in that allow them to stop, identify the problem to be solved, dig into that problem, gather data, make sense of that data, and act upon it.
And our project has been working on trying to improve math discourse, starting with the problem that we felt students were having inequitable participation around math talk and math discourse in classrooms.
What we first started doing was having whole group meetings, and then in those meetings we would identify a certain thing. So one of them that we identified was the sentence starters.
Teachers went in and tried one set of sentence starters, applied different data collection strategies. So some used popsicle sticks, others used check marks, and so on to track how many students were engaged and which sentence starters they were using in the context of problem solving. Continuing to refine the process and answer additional questions or make other refinements of the process in the classroom.
But it took at least 3 cycles before we started really seeing students using the sentence starters and talking about their math independently.
And so we were continually refining what we were going to do for data collection, and then we would report that out.
Because they brought that data back and had the opportunity to discuss it together across classrooms, they were able to share strategies that worked in different contexts and challenges that came up and refine that process. Then they would go back into the classroom and do that multiple times.
So by the time the end of the school year rolled around, we could hear and see students independently talking about their math, and it might not have been guided by an educator.
The level of math thinking that I've seen with students has gotten a lot deeper. They seem a little bit more ready to solve problems on their own and to stick to it and provide some reasoning for why they're answering the way they are.
When we say turn and talk, they are turning, and they're talking more to each other. They might say, oh, I thought that because, which was something that we were not hearing in the beginning. And to think that, they're 5 years old and they're really able to tell you what they're thinking is huge.
Great. So now that you've watched the video, let's do a little reflection, and let's consider 3 questions. And you'll see these on your screen. You'll see 3 chat boxes pop up. And so the first one is, what is the problem the teachers are trying to solve, as you saw the video? The second question is, how do they know that it is a problem? So what was it that they saw or, did that, to realize that this was a problem? And then the third question is, what will they do to address the problem? So what are those change practices that they implemented in order to try to solve the problem? So we have here promoting math discourse. Yep, that was one of the problems. They wanted students to be more engaged in the classroom. That is definitely the problem that they were trying to solve. Now, how do they know that it was a problem? There was inequitable opportunities. So yeah, I still see a couple of people still typing, so I'm going to give folks a few seconds. Students were not talking. It was teacher directed. Yeah. Lack of student engagement, definitely a big one. And understanding. These are all great. And so one other thing that they did do is also look at, standardized test data as well. And so what will they do to address the problem? So they talked about in the video that they started using math sentence starters. They also, they reflected on timely and those practical data measures. So so what they did is they implemented the sentence starters and frames in order to try to promote, math discourse and higher level thinking among their students. So this is great. Awesome. Yeah, so what happened to they used these sentence starters and frames, which were just very simple phrases that the students were able to use to explain and really justify their techniques for solving math problems. So, sentence starters also support that conceptual understanding, as the teacher facilitates those discussions and invites students, to ask open-ended questions, which also leads to, encouraging more critical thinking. So these are great. Okay, I think we can move on. So we asked these 3 questions, but now that I want to note here that the last question here, which is how do we know the change was an improvement? This question was not asked of you because we didn't ask that question because there wasn't anybody, the video didn't, the teachers in the video didn't really talk about collecting the data and really talking about how they collected the data and what they did. They didn't specifically talk about how they knew that the change practice made an improvement. So because it wasn't really mentioned in the video, even though they did it in real life, we didn't want to ask that question. So again, like the toolkit provides a lot of support related to data collection and review as part of the continuous improvement process. So now we're going to move on to actually give you an overview of the toolkit, which is why all of you are here. And now that we've talked a little bit about the continuous improvement process, we're going to actually talk about the different parts of the toolkit, which was just published this past Monday, and have you consider your readiness to use it to support your work, or if you know of a school or district that it may be helpful for, please share it. So what's in the toolkit? Here is an overview of what's in the toolkit. The toolkit is divided into two parts, and then within each part, we guide you through the continuous improvement process through a series of meetings. And the meetings are meant to start at the beginning of the school year and take you throughout one full school year until the end of the school year. So we want to make sure that you have the toolkit, so feel free to download the toolkit. Karen actually put the link in the chat where you'll be able to not only have access to the toolkit, but you'll have access to all of the materials. And so part one really just kind of gives folks just some sort of context and background about what continuous improvement is. It also talks about, you know, a CI leader or continuous improvement leader, as we call it. It takes them through certain steps before they embark on a continuous improvement effort. And part two, that's where we actually show you and have all of the series of meetings for you. And then we also include a couple of short videos as well as fillable tools and templates. So in part one, you know, it's really designed for this continuous improvement leader, which could be, you know, a principal, a district administrator, or a teacher leader for that team to really learn about the continuous improvement process and to assess their school or district's readiness to embark on a continuous improvement effort. And what we mean by assessing their readiness, this includes making sure that there's a culture of collaboration and that there are adequate resources to support this process. And some of the steps that are really outlined in part one include recruiting a team, defining the overall focus of the effort, and this may also include looking at data, determining, you know, the different roles of each team member. So in the toolkit, you know, we have, you know, there should be a continuous improvement leader, a meeting facilitator, a note taker, and then we also have planning the calendar as part of that. So such as planning the meetings and putting them on the school calendar, which really ensures that the meetings will take place. And then as you see here on the slide is an image of the actual calendar that we provide in the toolkit, which is handout 5, and it's on page I-16. In part 2, now this is where you will find the series of meetings, which can also be found on page 2-7 of the toolkit. And so the series of meetings are really designed for the improvement team. And the image that you see on the slide is an example of an actual meeting agenda that we provide. And as you can see, the agenda includes some really clear meeting goals. Also, we include some pre-meeting readings. We also include a series of guided activities that the continuous improvement leader can do with their team. We include which videos to watch because we have a total of 5 videos throughout the toolkit. So the actual meeting agendas will tell you exactly which videos to watch and when. We also have a lot of templates and tools, which is really great, and also some guiding questions and directions for next steps. So we really try to make this sort of a one-stop shop type of toolkit where we provide you with, you know, the background on continuous improvement, what it is. We provide checklists to make sure that you're assessing your readiness in order to embark on this process. And then we give you a series of meetings where you can actually implement this process with your team. And so it's really great to be able to sort of just go through this and be able to have the different tools that you can utilize in your school or district. So now I am going to hand it over to Diana, who is going to talk about other parts of the toolkit and then when and where to use continuous improvement. Diana?
Thanks, Shayla. So also in the toolkit, another element is the case example that runs throughout. So we created a case that's used to explain and provide examples of important continuous improvement tasks and ideas. And this case is actually based on the experience of the school that you saw in the video a little while ago, which is from New Suncook, Maine, although we've changed some of the details. So when you have a minute after the webinar and you have downloaded the toolkit, read the case. You can see it starts on page 2-5. And you'll definitely recognize some of the details, again, from that video you just saw, but it's slightly different. But having this real-world example should really help to guide users of the toolkit through the process and bring some of the continuous improvement steps to life, and show you kind of, what another school did in a similar circumstance and give you an idea of what a step might look like for your own school or district. So now we'd like to show you some examples of the types of activities and content in the toolkit. So start with the fishbone diagram. So two of the key elements of the continuous improvement effort are the defining of the problem and then moving from the problem to a potential solution. So the fishbone diagram is a tool to help you define the problem, and the driver diagram is a tool that helps you identify potential solutions. And the toolkit moves step by step through the process, first by showing a fishbone diagram filled out for the case example, which is what you see here on the screen, and then leading your team through the steps to actually fill it out yourselves for your own context. So in this example fishbone diagram, you'll see it's a way to clearly define a problem that the team in the case example wants to solve. So you see the problem defined on the left, the problem statement, which is that students in elementary grades are below proficient in math and low-income students are disproportionately represented among those students. So that's the main problem that they've identified. And related to this problem, a team then brainstorms a series of factors for the problem. So what might be contributing to the problem? So for example, you can see that the team has decided that, one of the reasons students are below proficient in math is that teachers need additional supports to provide effective math instruction. Some of the other factors are that students are not engaged in their learning, students lack deep understanding of math concepts, or the curriculum is not rigorous. And it may be that these are all contributing to the problem. So for each of these factors, the team then goes deeper to uncover what causes might contribute to the problem and to the factors. So it's kind of getting down to the root of what is causing the problem. So for example, if the factor is that teachers need additional supports to provide effective math instruction, some things that might be causing that are that maybe teachers are new to the school's math curriculum, so they need additional supports. Or it might be that teachers have limited access to tools and models for developing instructional activities. Another cause might be that teachers have received limited professional development on math instruction that promotes engagement. So these are details of the problem, again, in the case example. So through this exercise with the fishbone diagram, you'll get at what may be root causes of the problem. And something I just want to note about this exercise is that it's going to lead you to identify potential solutions to the problem. So it's important to start focusing on the problem. And then once you get to the potential solutions, that's what you'll end up trying out in the plan, do, study, act cycles. And if some of the problems you identify in this brainstorm are not within your locus of control, that's okay, but you still want to be sure that the potential solutions are within your control. So just as an example, staying with this math professional development example, if a problem is that the state doesn't provide enough money for the school district for math professional development, that may not be something that a team of teachers at a school can change this year. So in moving from the problem to the solution, you'd want to think about ways you could address that. And one way could be to identify effective free online professional development to use. So just keep that locus of control issue in mind. And this is the work that we do as we move from the problem definition here with the fishbone diagram to strategizing solutions through the driver diagram, which is here. So again, this is the driver diagram you'll find in the toolkit. It's filled out for the case example, and it really helps the team to move from a problem to a solution. And so the team uses the information that was in the fishbone diagram to develop and inform their driver diagram. So in the fishbone diagram, you have all the way on the left the problem statement related to students in elementary grades being below proficient. And then in the driver diagram, the team took that and kind of flipped that into their aim. So their overall aim is having the percentage of students performing at proficient or above increasing by 10%, and the gap between low-income students and their peers will decrease. So you can see this is directly connected to what's in the fishbone and what the problem is. And through the fishbone diagram, as the team identified possible causes of the problem, in the driver diagram, the team thinks of ways to address those causes, getting to more and more specific actions that can be tested. And you see all the way on the right are these really specific change practices that will be tested out. So for example, thinking again of the cause of the problem being that teachers may have received limited professional development, then potential solutions to address that, or these drivers, could be to improve teachers' knowledge and use of best practices in math instruction, to provide math professional development for teachers, and then getting even more specific to a change practice could be that the math specialist provides professional development and support for implementing rich tasks. So that's really specific. That's something that teachers can test out, and administrators can test out. And you can see that this driver diagram helps a team to move from an aim that's fairly general to a series of concrete and specific actions that could be implemented and tested. So now we've talked a bit about what's in the toolkit. You might be wondering how to know whether or where or when to engage in continuous improvement. So I think we have that covered as well, and part one of the toolkit is designed to really help a school or district leader go through a series of steps in preparing to embark on a continuous improvement effort. So let's look at that. What are these steps in preparing to embark on a continuous improvement effort? These are the steps that we recommend. I'll pause and give you a minute to read through these. And we're going to focus on the first step, which is assessing the school or district's readiness to engage in continuous improvement. So as you assess your readiness, consider these questions. And these are key questions you'd want to answer as you consider whether you and your school or district have the capacity to really successfully embark on a continuous improvement effort. And I'll say it's not that you have to have, really strong yeses, resounding yeses for all of this, but you do need to have a realistic understanding of the investment of time and resources to be successful. So, it will be time spent meeting, testing practices, and you want to make sure that there's a collective appetite for this work. So take a look at these questions and think about the answers for your own context, because I'll next ask you to share some strengths and challenges that you think you might have related to readiness. So for example, thinking about whether there's broad agreement in your school or district or organization on the need to change some practice. Is there a culture of collaboration? Are there resources to support this effort? Will there be time for your team to meet and work on this? Is there data to support the identification of the challenge? Or are there basic data literacy skills among at least some members of the team? So let me move to the next slide here and ask you to share strengths or challenges that you think you may have related to readiness. And I'll go back to this slide so you can see, although it's a little bit small, hopefully you can still see some of the questions that are up there and think about those as you're typing in and reflecting on your strengths and challenges. So a challenge is seeing improvement work as an add-on. Absolutely. And I think even, more so in this year, I think it can be overwhelming to think, oh, we're doing so much and dealing with so much change and adapting. Doing this is just another challenge. Having a really large school district, that can be a lot. How do you do this? Not everyone's seeing a problem to be addressed. That's tough. That's a good place to start to really get people to understand or agree that there is a problem to be addressed. Some strengths are educators who are committed to lifelong learning for themselves. That's great. That's definitely a strength to have here because this is a process that will hopefully build capacity. Teachers can go through it and learn about a challenge they have, but also learn about a process that they can use to address other challenges and problems of practice in the future. Having a PLC team structure, that's great. That's a built-in structure who can, has time to meet. They work together. There's that culture of collaboration, and they can work on this and pick this toolkit up, and do it. Employee turnover, again, going back to challenges, that's tough because you do want to have, some continuity as you're going through this process. Spending too much time defining the problem, that can be tough. That can be a little bit of a trap. People can get stuck on, talking about the problem and dwelling on it. And it is important to move on to, okay, well, what can we do about it? What are some ways we can address it? So yeah, definitely making sure you don't spend too much time on that is important. A fixed mindset, that can be hard because this is about, how can we make changes and grow. Identifying easy but effective measures, that is tough. And we heard in the video the teachers talking about, that was something they continued to change was how were they collecting data? What measures were they using? I think they really reflected on trying to figure out a way to make it an easier lift and something that was easier to do, so they kept with it. So this is great. Too many change ideas being implemented at the same time, that can be tough because then it might be hard to see what's working and really identifying which one is the one to continue with or which one is the one to make an edit to or a change to adapt. Having central infrastructure to support the process as a strength, that's great. That certainly helps. Collaborative structure, common planning time, those are so key, such good important strengths to have. Having that built-in meeting time so that you don't have to find time and figure out scheduling for 5 different teachers and 2 administrators, that can be really tough. Well, this is great. I thank you so much for sharing your strengths and challenges, and hopefully this is helpful for you to reflect on and think, okay, well, yeah, maybe we are really prepared to do this, thinking about your strengths and then thinking about challenges. There's some areas that you certainly can focus on bolstering so that you might be more ready to take on continuous improvement. So I think that's really helpful to identify those and be aware of them and think about, well, what can we do? And realizing that, you're never going to get to be perfectly ready, and just being aware of some of those challenges, it's helpful to go into the process with. So great. Thank you so much for sharing. Okay. Let's move on 2, hearing from a practitioner. So I am really excited that we're able to hear from a practitioner today who actually piloted the toolkit, which is exciting and really relevant for all of you. So we have Cassandra Townsend joining us today to provide the practitioner's perspective. And Cassandra is the Director of Special Education at Charlotte Central School and the Director of Behavior Systems at Champlain Valley School District in Vermont. And last school year, I and some other REL colleagues worked with Cassandra and her team to address a problem of practice using the continuous improvement process in this toolkit. So we use these videos, we use these templates, and we use this process. And although our work was meant to continue through June, we of course had to stop in March when everything was shut down and schools were going remote due to COVID. But we did get through a lot of work. So we do want to hear from Cassandra and what she has to share. So Cassandra, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to join
Yeah.
you.
Great. So before we talk about what your team did, can you tell us a little bit about Champlain Valley School District for some context?
Yeah, absolutely. So Champlain Valley School District is right outside of Burlington, Vermont, for those of you who are not familiar with our small state. We're one of the larger school districts in Vermont. We have about 3,900 students. When I say large, that's Vermont scale. So for the state of Vermont, that is quite large. I know in many of the other states that's very small. And we have a high school. We also have 6 schools that are, or 5 schools that are grades K through 8, and then 1 high school 9 through 12.
Great, thank you. That's helpful. So let's go back to the model for improvement, which Shayla talked about at the beginning of the webinar, and start off with what problem were you trying to solve?
Sure. So as Diana had mentioned, we started this last year, and a lot of what we worked on was really that readiness piece, which I think is so critically important, and the toolkit was very helpful for that, making sure that we had a collaborative team, making sure we had the time to meet. One of the problems that we wanted to pursue during this pilot is we've been a PDIS school for about 18 years at Charlotte Central, so that's Positive Behavior Interventions and Supports, for those of you who are not familiar with that. And we have a great system for keeping track of discipline data, but we sort of have this overwhelming wondering and concern around whether or not students on IEPs, individualized education plans, were being over-identified in our school-wide discipline system. So we actually spent quite a bit of time teasing that out. We tried to figure out a problem statement. We looked at a ton of data that we already had, which was a great start. And one of the things that surprised our team was we actually realized that in terms of our discipline data, it was more pervasive regarding the majority of students, not only on students on IEPs. So we sort of tweaked our problem statement as we went along to really think about sort of what were the problem behaviors, how do we reduce the problem behaviors in the hallway settings, which was an area that we were really concerned about. We definitely spent some time in this area trying to tease out the problem. I know Diana just spoke about that. Sometimes I think our teams get into that cycle of admiring the problem, and sometimes you just have to pick something and go for it, and that's sort of the beauty of, I think, this process that we went through. It was really helpful in allowing us to sort of tease out and also give us the confidence to just try something. So that's where we started.
Great, thank you. Yeah, and I love how you described that you went in thinking this was the problem, but after you looked at some data, you realized, well, maybe it's something a little bit different. And yeah, I think, that's a great reflection that you could have, gone in and really admired the problem. I like that terminology and spent a lot of time with it, but you needed to jump in and try and work on solving it. So can you talk a little bit about the change or changes you tried out and why?
Yeah, absolutely. So once we decided our sort of big aim around discipline and referrals in the hallway settings and during transitions in particular, we also realized that some of the change practices are things that we may have done in the past, but being a PDIS school for so long, we kind of slacked on, and I think that's typical, right? When you get into a groove of an implementation of anything, there are times where you may not be implementing it with as much fidelity as you would in the beginning. So one of the change practices that we ended up trying was, as a PDIS school, one of our expectations is that teachers teach our school-wide expectations explicitly and frequently throughout the year. And so one of the change practices was actually really reinforcing that teachers teach our school-wide expectations, our behavioral expectations, during their morning meetings for about a 1-week period. So that way we could then take that little change, that little plan, and then collect some data to see if it had an impact. The other 2 change practices that we implemented during this pilot was really reinforcing students' positive behavior immediately when they occurred. So in the hallways, when students were engaged in walking appropriately in the hallway, right? Making sure that the adults and the teachers were very mindful of pairing verbal acknowledgement with our tangible system. So that was one of the other changes. The other thing that we've tried is during our morning announcements, we decided to flood every morning for a week during the morning announcements a friendly reminder to all staff and all students about what are our expectations for school, what are our big 3, and at Charlotte Central School, that is take care of yourself, take care of others, and take care of this place. So those were the big 3 changes.
That's great. Thank you so much. And I think something that was really nice was seeing how you incorporated this with things that you already had happening in the school. So you're a PBIS school and you wanted to, use this as a way to kind of reinforce some of that and maybe pick back up and figure out where you weren't implementing it so well and try doing some of it better. And I think that's such a great way to do it, because then it's not like, okay, we have PBIS that we're doing and now we have this other thing on top of it. And then it just feels like all these initiatives, and that can be overwhelming and hard, understandably hard to do. So I think that was a really smart way to go about it. So recognizing that you all didn't get to do all of the plan, do, study, act cycles that you wanted to, how did you know, or would you have known that these changes were an improvement? What were you looking for? What kind of data or what kind of changes?
Yeah, that's a great question. As I mentioned earlier, we have a lot of discipline data. We use the SWIFT program, School-Wide Information System tool, that is associated with implementing PDIS. But one of the things, so that's sort of the big system that we use to sort of look at, and could use that in the future to look at sort of if we did see a decline in office discipline referrals due to our change practice implementation. But what we did end up doing in our short time before our school closed down on March 13th due to COVID, we were able to collect some data. Our team developed very brief self-assessment surveys. We would go into the hallway and just very quickly ask an adult, how many positives did you, hand out today? Or do you think having the intercom speak to the announcements was helpful? So really getting their perspective. We also were able to do that with students. The student data is always interesting because we also not just looked at the quantitative answers, but also the qualitative. So we had some pretty funny answers from some of our students. Like the announcements helped me to remember, which is great, right? We didn't really get to the next step to taking that data and then diving into whether or not there was a reduction in office discipline referrals. That's something we would have done if we were continuing down this path. But I think it was really helpful for us to sort of have, really simple techniques to gather data. I think sometimes we think, especially in continuous improvement, that it has to be a large, laborious effort, whereas you could literally go down the hallway and collect data, and it could take a minute or 2 or less, right? So that was really helpful for our team to sort of normalize that there's so much data that we could look at it, and it doesn't need to take hours and hours, and it doesn't need to be perfect, as long as you're then taking it back to the team and having really great conversations around the data.
That's great. Yeah, I love that you all were able to just kind of build some of your own tools that were really quick and able to be used. And, I think just in recognition of that, you didn't want this to be burdensome for people. And that was, I think, helped you to be able to do more and collect data and then come back and look at it. And I wish you would have been able to work with your team more. But I'm glad that you guys were able to participate. You were great to work with. And, I'm glad you're able to use this. So thank you so much, Cassandra. So helpful to hear about your experience. Now we have some time for questions from the audience. So I'd love to hear, I know we have a bunch of questions coming in, and please feel free to enter questions into the chat. These can be questions for Cassandra about her experience, questions for myself or Shayla and Karen. So feel free to keep them coming. Thanks, Chris's comment. What can you say, COVID? I know, and it feels like, a million years ago at this point last year. But so let me look at some of the questions we have here. Let's see. So some of the questions about measurement, let's start with those. So we had a question about how do you help people identify appropriate measures for improvement, and kind of related to that, how do we track progress, especially with so many new systems and data sources in COVID? So Shayla, Cassandra, if you want to add anything here, please feel free. I will say that we didn't cover in depth here, but the toolkit includes a full session where you would have a meeting with your team on identifying measures. It includes a table for generating all kinds of potential measures. There's also a Plan, Do, Study, Act planning template that allows your team to identify appropriate measures and then hypothesize about what the data might tell them and track the results over time. And there is some information in that kind of preparing to embark on the continuous improvement effort about how to, in general, kind of build some data capacity in your team. Shayla and Cassandra, is there anything you'd want to add there?
This is Cassandra. I would just add that there's so many data systems. I hear you. There are so many out there, and I do think it's important. We sort of have a philosophy, work smarter, not harder. And so how do you do an inventory of what are your data sources? What are your things you're using? How can you align them? Are there any redundancies in what you're doing in terms of data collection? We have found that in many of our schools at times, multiple people are collecting the same types of data. Again, that's not as efficient as it could be. So really just thinking about how you can streamline some of that. I know we've done that with our data systems, especially, now that we really just have one system to keep track of office discipline referrals. That's been really helpful. And we've used that for 18 years now.
That's great. Thank you. Shayla, did you want to add anything?
Yes. No, I think that is great. I mean, I've been working with schools, and that's one thing that does come up a lot is how do you determine the measures. And so a lot of times we do a data study first with the team in order to try to determine and helping them understand those measures. So I think, yeah, Cassandra, that's great. What you were stating, I totally agree.
Great, thank you. We have a question about what is kind of distinct about this toolkit, or how it relates to what's related to continuous improvement with Carnegie and improvement science. This is definitely not the first continuous improvement toolkit out there. Shayla, do you want to say anything about that?
Yeah. So obviously, we don't claim to be creating something entirely new. Continuous improvement has been used, especially in healthcare, for a very long time. This work really rests on the shoulders of other resources that have been previously developed. So we did rely on some of the work that Carnegie spearheaded for several years, as well as the Institutes, the Institutes of Health. As well. So, I mean, what we have intended to do is to really create a kind of a one-stop shop, as I mentioned earlier, where we're targeting educators who want to take a team through an entire school year engaging in this process. And so, with meeting agendas, activities, templates, tools that they can use, and a roadmap to follow. So our hope really is that educators without the benefit of considerable resources or, being able, if they don't have access to consulting services, this toolkit really, we hope, can create a way for them to implement this cycle on their own, and hopefully the toolkit will help with that.
Thank you. Yeah, and the toolkit has a list of references that you can see at the end that shows a lot of these sources and ways you can find out more information about continuous improvement if you'd like. Okay, another question is, do you have to follow every step in the toolkit or do everything that's here? I would say that, we lay out all the steps, we provide a lot of information, readings for you, tools, videos, but that it should be what you have the capacity for, and it should be what's compatible with you and your team or your school. So you don't have to follow every single step or, spend as much time on it as we say in the toolkit. I think, and Cassandra can talk about this even before COVID, that, there's going to be challenges where we might have a meeting and a teacher needs to step out because, there's something that they need to address with a student or something in their classroom. And that's, I think, not news to anybody here, and that's going to happen. So, yeah, I think being able to be adaptable and realize that some of this may need to be adapted and some of the timelines may need to change.
Yeah, I would just add to that. I think that's what's, in a way, really great about the toolkit from my perspective, having been in this for a while, and I know a lot of resources around continuous improvement. It's just the ability to sort of, you can, take certain checklists, different handouts, and use them on your own. I think there's always that question of, well, if you don't follow the process, how well is your outcome going to be, right? So you can certainly, I think, pull pieces of it, but I think really thinking about methodically about the continuous improvement process, especially some of the data conversations at the end, and then really determining whether you're going to adopt or adapt or abandon a change practice is critically important. And sometimes from my experience, we kind of forget that last little nugget, or we forget to sometimes reflect on what we've already implemented and then made a decision. Or are we stuck in the cycle of doing the same thing over and over and getting the same results, right? So I think that's what's really great about this toolkit, is also just, making sure that you have little pieces you can pull, but also I like to use the whole thing personally from start to finish.
Great, thank you, Cassandra. Again, so helpful to hear from a practitioner here. All right, let's see. I'm sorting through the other questions that we have. I saw there was a question about how to motivate the unmotivated. So if, maybe some people had one of the areas of challenges related to readiness might be that maybe leadership wasn't as invested, or maybe that not everyone on the team is as motivated to participate. How do you get them involved? Shayla, do you, or Cassandra, do you want to say anything about that?
Sure, I'm happy to jump in.
Oh, go ahead, Cassandra.
Okay, sorry. Yeah, I think there's always people in our field that are unmotivated. I think it's important to build relationships and get to learn about why they might have certain perspectives on things, as we always do as educators. I also think there is power in positive peer pressure at times. So if you have colleagues who are very excited about certain things and have maybe a naysayer join, for instance, that might help to open their eyes to the potential. It's also helpful to get their perspective, or folks who are unmotivated. Why are they that way? So I would just investigate a little bit about sort of their function regarding why they might not be so motivated.
Yeah, and also, you can always we suggest that you start small, right, with a small group that is more motivated, and then you can scale from there. But yeah, I mean, it's really, it can be tough trying to work with teachers or other educators that are not motivated. I'm working with a charter school right now where like half of the staff is not motivated and half is. So what we did is we sort of mixed up the small groups and combined some of the ones that are more motivated, so that way they can sort of, motivate the others that are not really buying into this process. And so after 2 months of working with them, I'm starting to see changes in those teachers that were very unmotivated, very negative, about the whole process. And now they're actually implementing PDSA cycles and actually testing out change practices. So yeah, it can be a challenge.
Yeah, well, that's great to hear that you are seeing some changes there. Thanks, Shayla. What about, we have a question about how long it might take to see improvement. So I can just talk a little bit about the school that we based the case example on, and I think you heard all this in the video, is that they did go through several Plan, Do, Study, Act cycles and were able to see improvement, in the course of the school year. And by the end of the year, they saw the students were actually talking and using math discourse. Shayla, maybe, I don't know if at your school that you're working with right now that you just mentioned, if they're getting to see any improvement yet, or they're just getting into their Plan, Do, Study, Act cycles. But what else have you seen in schools that you've worked with, and how soon they've seen improvement?
Yeah, so with us, we've been working with that particular school for 2 months now. And so at first we sort of needed to build their knowledge and what the process is and how it works and what it may look like. And so what we did is we just started right away, talking about, their issue was student engagement. How do you get students more engaged now that they're virtual? And so we came up with like one small, change that they could implement, and they implemented that in, 2 weeks. And after 2 weeks, they started seeing that students that were not showing up or, staying for the whole class are actually more engaged, and they tried that out. And now they're trying out actually working, in small groups, and so putting high performers with low performers to try to see if those students, the high performers, can motivate those low performers to become more engaged in class. And so they have been seeing small changes, but yeah, they have been seeing changes. I mean, we're going to be working with them the whole school year. That's our suggestion. And so because we want to make sure that we collect enough data and that we see enough changes in order for the school to turn around.
That's great. Thank you. Cassandra, did you want to add anything?
No, I'm all set. Thanks.
Okay. Thank you. All right. Looking at some more questions about data. So what really constitute data? And I think Cassandra addressed this really well, and maybe she can speak a little more about that. But I will just reflect that sometimes I do, hear or see schools who are maybe overwhelmed or think they have to collect a lot of data, or it has to be very technical, and it doesn't have to be the creation of a whole new data system, but it's ways just to kind of track what you're doing and make sure that you are, one, doing the practice that you said you would do, and also finding easy ways to see if there may be changes over time. And Cassandra, I know you said a bit about this already, but did you want to say a little more about data? Because I think you've had some really good experience with collecting data and using it in a way that's not overwhelming.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the biggest things I think is really know sort of what data are you looking to collect, and don't collect data that you're not planning to use. Sometimes we tend to collect too much data, right? And that can be overwhelming. So what I liked about our process was we really narrowed down our focus, our goal, our aim, and we were able to say, okay, well, let's just use self-assessments, or let's just stand in the hallway and do a visual tally of how many teachers are standing outside of their classroom giving positive acknowledgments to students. So again, I like the idea of right now, especially with all of us with so many different hats we're wearing, we have so much on our plate. I think as you just need to be really thoughtful about collecting data that will really give you some meaningful answers to the problem that you're solving. And you might have to go old school, maybe do some tallies.
That's great. Thank you, Cassandra. And I think Karen also noted that sometimes there's already data that you're collecting, and you may be able to kind of look at it in a new way to take advantage of that too. And I think, we all know you all are collecting a lot of data already, so if there's a way to leverage that, then that's great. Shayla, did you want to add anything here about the data?
No, it's just, as I stated before, that was one thing that did come up with the school that I'm working with, is how much is enough data, right? So, and a lot of times we have to remind them that data is not just, standardized test scores, that student work is data. And so, kind of changing their mindset as to, what it is, what types of data they can collect and what is considered data. So that has helped a lot with the group in implementing the change practices that they're implementing now, is that, collecting, exit tickets and doing, not just surveys, but talking to students is a form of collecting data. So that's always interesting, to get, those types of questions, and people have this mindset that data is just, usually numbers, but it isn't.
Yeah, absolutely. No, that's so helpful. Thank you so much. So I think that will wrap up our Q&A portion of today. And we just have a couple of things to do to wrap up. So I'm actually going to hand it off to Shayla to wrap us up.
Thank you. Yes, so before we wrap up, these are the questions and answer. What we would like to hear your feedback. At the end, we always collect feedback because we always want to make changes. So if you can please take 5 minutes at the end of the webinar to fill it out, that would be great. Once we log you off, you'll get a link to the webinar. And so thank you for joining us today. The webinar recording is going to be archived and uploaded to IES's YouTube channel. We'll email you a link to the recording as soon as it's ready. Have a great rest of your day.